Welcome back. If you are just joining us, we are having our second conversation for the morning, and it's all about mental health. The focus this morning will be on how does trauma affect you and how to overcome trauma. So we have some professionals here with us to talk to us just about that. We have Kathy Esquivel, and she is the founder and secretary of the Mental Health Association. Also with her is Azalia Larrieu, and she is a certified clinical trauma specialist and also vice president of the Mental Health Association. Ladies, good morning, welcome, and thank you for joining us. This is such an interesting topic that we will be having, trauma and how trauma affects us. I think that this particular topic has since created quite a rise in the conversation around mental health, where we are looking at what could be traumatic experiences that we would have had either in our adult years or in our youth. Let's talk about first what trauma is and how does that affect you?
All right. Well, a lot of people believe that trauma, and I like to start with what it's not. So a lot of people believe that trauma is the incident itself. What it really is the experience of that incident and how that has affected that individual. So whether it is emotional, cognitively, right? It's the way that individual processes, and usually we don't process, right? So trauma is, and again, also to move away from the stereotype of mental health, or, you know, we like to say that trauma is quite natural, right? Because if you think about it, we're all mammals, and our instinct is to survive. And that is what our brain is made to do. It's made to survive. So everything we do, we're trying to either fight, flee away from it. Right?
Fight or flight.
Right. Right, and that is part of what the nervous system does to protect us, right? So what is traumatic to you might not be traumatic to someone else, right? So it's very important that we don't generalize as well. For individuals, just losing a pet is very hard. It's like, and they go through the entire process of grief and loss, right? So you cannot generalize what trauma is.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that trauma is something that everyone experiences, because a lot of times we associate trauma with something extreme, like seeing the death of someone, or you know, the things that you would not assume trauma to be is like the loss of a pet, but to others it's considered that because of that personal relationship. So I think that that is really interesting. So you identified what trauma is not, and you also said that trauma is an experience. Let's talk about how that affects an individual.
So, well, I like to give examples as well. So if we go to an example where you were in a car accident, right? What the body does is, and what the brain does, it remembers these incidents, right? So we have these neurons that are running, and it attaches the memory to these incidents that happen. So if I was in a car accident and I didn't put my seatbelt, or I had my seatbelt on, just going back into that car, it brings back these triggers and flashbacks, right? So you're going to probably see these things happening, nightmares, right? Increase in anxiety, being nervous about something, worrying a lot as well. So you're seeing a lot of these symptoms when you look at, am I going through something difficult?
Is that what we also call PTSD?
That is a diagnosis.
Okay.
Right. That is a diagnosis, post-traumatic stress disorder that can happen because of, it doesn't have to, because remember, we're all processing the experience.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't have to lead to that, but for most people who always are, like, your nervous system is always at that alert, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Why does it appear, and I may be wrong on this, you guys are the experts. Why does it appear that not too many persons who have experienced trauma and dealing with the effects of trauma access the various avenues for help, it would seem as if though persons suffer in silence or find their own way to try to cope with what they've been through, their traumatic experiences, and not necessarily seek the kind of professional help that would allow them to go through this process.
Right. I think society. Society plays a huge part. Culture, right? So when we think about trauma, I like to bring in integrating the concept of intergenerational trauma, because when I look at my population here in Belize, right, we come from it starts with colonization, right? It could be war as well. So these things happen, but I either don't want to realize that it is happening to me, right? And I can't show it because what will other people think, right? If I'm a male, it's quickly I'm weak. If I'm a female, but aren't you supposed to be a strong woman? Isn't that what you should portray? So it's all of these stereotypes that we hold, right? So we don't want to come out and talk about it because it'll be weak, but it really is a natural process.
Yeah. Let's get Miss Kathy Esquivel in the conversation as founder of the Mental Health Association. This is something that I would only assume the association has been lobbying for and talking about for a very long time. Let's talk about how this association ensures that mental health is a conversation that we're always having.
Okay, thank you. Well, the Mental Health Association is an advocacy group. We're not a service provider. And from the very beginning, we've worked closely with the Ministry of Health. And there has been a change. People, although not as much as we would like, people are more willing to access mental health support services. 20 years ago, we didn't have people like Azalia, but we now have quite a lot of both private and public providers. And I think there is a gradual change. So we do try to work with Ministry of Health. I need to say that we were very pleased. I think you'll show this later. But this is the Belize National Mental Health Policy. It's a Ministry of Health book. But many of the things we've been advocating for, I mean, not just because of us, but a lot of people, they've found their way into the policy. So things like human rights, we have to respect the rights of everyone, regardless of their mental health. And at one time, when people had severe mental health issues, especially psychoses, the first thing we want, well, let's lock them away so we don't have to deal with it. So there is that. We need to make sure that help is accessible, that people can get the help. And we want to integrate mental health. You know, for a long while, mental health was something pushed to the side. And even many medical practitioners were, oh, that's mental health, we don't deal with that. You go to the side. So
you can't see it, you can't understand it.
Right, and it's part, in fact, you can't cure physical health if you don't also work on mental health. So the two have to be integrated, and that's here. As far as possible, let's try to keep our treatment and our options non-institutional. In other words, you only institutionalize when there really is no other option. The Mental Health Association is really proud to have worked on this, and one of the things we've done, the Ministry of Health has a really good, internationally recognized community mental health service. We really applaud them. And the medication is free, the service is free. but often people need social support. Like, yeah, you get the medication, but you don't have anything to eat and whatever. So we actually opened and run the Welcome Resource Center in Belize City, and that offers social support. You can get a meal, a wash, a shower, change of clothes, and whatever. So these are the things that we try to advocate for. And so, yeah, we really applaud. I know this is on the Ministry of Health website. So that's what we try to do, advocate.
I have a question with respect to what you mentioned earlier about moving away from having to institutionalize persons who suffer from mental illness. I think as a layman, and perhaps others would share the same outlook, I think generationally, or the way we've been traditioned, we say, okay, you know what? There was a Rockview, there's the Palm Center, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Seaview first.
Okay, well, there we go, right? So our general thinking is, okay, these persons are out on the street, wandering the streets, and sometimes they're not only a detriment to themselves, but they're also a detriment to other persons who are out in the public. So how do you deal with a situation like that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking of an incident that happened a few years ago where an individual was shot and killed on the swing bridge who had suffered from severe mental illness and was a threat to persons who were accessing or traversing the bridge.
It's not very long ago. I think it was last year.
Perhaps it was last year, fairly recently then. But
Yeah.
how do we look at that in the context of saying, well, perhaps if the person was in an institution and dealt with separately, it would have led to a completely different outcome. It's just an average person's question.
No, you're quite right, and that's one of the things we advocate, but it's very rare. For instance, if you had diabetes, and when you have a chronic, your blood sugar goes up, you might have to go into hospital to get it stabilized, but no one would suggest that you need to stay in hospital for the rest of your life. So if you have a mental illness, which is chronic, but can be generally managed, when there's an acute incident, something needs to happen. But that doesn't mean you should be locked away in an institution for the rest of your life. It's not the best way to deal with it. So we do need better ways to deal with acute incidents. In fact, Ministry of Health and the Mental Health Association has been working with the police because they are the first responders, and there are needs for acute help. But an institution which is forever is not the way to deal with it. So we're not saying that you shouldn't have responses to acute incidents, but that response can't be lock them away forever.
Simply because we are short on time, and this is such a rich conversation, but we do want to take a look at some ways that you can overcome trauma and the ways that it affects you. So, Miss Azalia, let's get back to that conversation.
Okay. And just to piggyback from this as well, I think a lot of the times, to answer that question fairly, a lot of it is education and awareness. There is a huge difference when it comes to mental illness. That is a diagnosis. As I said, we all have these traumatic experiences. We're all dealing with it. It's quite natural. What can I do, right? And then we have mental illnesses where it's actually a diagnosis, and maybe you need both medication, right? So psychotherapy along with medication. Right? But it is not that these individuals that you see out there, as long as they're on medication, they're okay, right? And I loved, and just to bring in I got in touch with Kathy over Benji, that book. And I love that book, and I always talk about it because when you read the book, it takes you right back into the community. And, you know, like, you're there, you're seeing the people. It's so descriptive and rich, and it shows you the life of somebody that has suffered schizophrenia.
And actually, it's based on my late brother-in-law. But it's an adventure story published by Kubola, set in Belize. But the main character is someone with schizophrenia.
Oh, wow.
And we were his primary caregivers. Now, my brother-in-law never got into any of the adventures in the book, but the character is him.
Yeah.
And before I got married and knew him, he was in and out of then Seaview. I got married in 1971. He never went back into Seaview. So his condition was managed. Now, he was not extreme, although he had, you know, violent episodes in the past. So as Azalia said, yeah, there you go. But it can be managed.
Yeah.
So definitely a look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overcoming these traumatic experiences, a lot of it is just letting it, identifying your emotion, feelings, you know, and letting your body do what it's supposed to do. A lot of times we don't.
What should your body do?
We should be able to feel and identify what is happening. We should be able to talk about that, right, with someone. So instead of what we usually do is try to block it out.
To suppress
and that's
it.
when, right, and then that's when we start to suppress these things, and we start to do things like work too much, increase substances,
Distract
because I
yourself.
want to feel good. Right, and these are good, but for the meantime, it may help, but it's not healing you.
It's like a Band-Aid, I guess you could say.
Right, it's a Band-Aid. And if we keep covering your wound that you have, because you can't see it, but it's there and it's showing every day, it's showing the way you trying to communicate with someone, with hostility, with anger, with frustration, that's what comes up, right? Anything someone tells you, oh, you're trying to hurt me, you know, you're always on that defensive mode, right? You're not at a calm. Now, this was natural when we were out in the woods trying to survive, but here it's not, right? And so definitely if you're seeing an intense flashbacks to a traumatic experiences, sometimes it shows up in other ways in your relationships. You're not able to communicate with your partner, right? Something is happening, right? It shows up in our behavior. Then I would, you know, psychotherapy is something to look at, seeing a professional, moving to that. But it's quite normal if it's not, nothing is wrong with you. And I love to just let that, so everyone knows, going to see a counselor, a therapist, it's okay. It's just processing what has happened to you.
And if you need extra help in getting medication, also nothing is wrong with you either, yeah?
Exactly, right. Because it's either we do the medication, you continue psychotherapy, and I have you here. And that's important, that you're alive.
Yeah. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I wish we were able to touch a bit on the past, as you mentioned, Ms. Kathy, where in 1997 we were able to see a change in Belize where persons would not be charged for attempted suicide. And that's huge. Imagine before that you would actually be charged for attempting to take your own life. We've come such a long way, and I only hope that we continue on this path to further normalize the conversation around mental health, and that way I'm sure we will be able to see a lot more persons get the help that they need. Yes. Alrighty, we are going to take another break, and when we come back, the conversation is about the BDF anniversary. Stay with us.